Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Savannah Remkus if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is Thursday, January the 20th, and today we're going to talk about a series that has really kind of blown up our website over the past 2 days, and this is a series called Banking on Crime. It is by two of our reporters here, John Archibald and Ashley Remkus, who are both joining me here today. And this series, we published several stories by John yesterday, several by Ashley today, and there is some more coming tomorrow. Now, there are some very just outrageous stories in these tales that both John and Ashley are telling us. John's story is really focused on Brookside and how fines and fees are really making up almost half of this town's revenue. And Ashley focused on Baldwin County in South Alabama, where ankle monitors are rampant, even for people who are being charged with low-level crimes. So we're going to talk about both of these stories, get into some of your questions that you've had after reading the stories. So first, John, I'm going to let you talk first about your stories. Yours published yesterday, and we know that people have really been giving an outpouring of support here for you and saying, wow, these are some incredible stories. So what have you seen from the outpouring here?
Really, the most amazing thing I've seen is the number of people who have responded who have had trouble themselves in places in Brookside and surrounding areas and in other places, because I think people can see, people can relate to this because they've been through it. And I mean, dozens, probably more than 100 people have called with tips about things that have happened to them out there. And it's rampant. People getting caught into the, having stacks of charges piled up against them for minor traffic accidents, being drawn into this cycle of debt. And it's not just the people who are the poorest. I mean, it's everybody's, sort of a potential victim of this, but the people who have the least are clearly the ones who suffer the most.
Well, I want to go over a couple of stats that you included in this story on Brookside yesterday. And this is just kind of mind-boggling if you think about it. So there is a population of about 1,253 people in Brookside. So let's say 1,300, just for numbers' sake here. There was a 1,478% increase in towing from 2018 to 2020. That is 2 years. If you've ever had your car towed, you know it is expensive to get that car out. Well, then let's look at fees, fines, forfeitures. We see that there was $610,000 in fees and forfeitures in 2020, which ended up making about 49%, so just under half of Brookside's revenue. That is an astonishing number. John, is that anything you ever expected when you started looking into this story?
No, I mean, it's the one thing that when I first saw a document on an audit that was included in a lawsuit that outlined, some of those numbers, it's one of those things that makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck, because this is not normal. Keep in mind, when the Justice Department essentially rebuked Ferguson, Missouri after the Michael Brown shooting, they had part of the problem was that they had 20% of their budget coming from fines and forfeitures. And 49% is outrageously high. And that number alone it dwarfs all the other numbers. Let's face it, they decided in 2018 they were going to go from a one-man police department in a city that had reported essentially no crime to the state for years, to a more professional police department, meaning a more aggressive police department. You can say the numbers of fines will increase the more police officers you have. That's a natural sort of progression when your entire goal seems to be to stop people and find ways to bring them to municipal court to pay fines.
I think that one of the most egregious things that you outlined in the story is about how people, you mentioned earlier, while everybody's affected by this, as we see often, unfortunately, the poorest people are affected the most. And an example you have in your story is somebody who gets maybe pulled over for something as what we would seem as simple as maybe an expired tag, a light being out on your car, something like that, that totals maybe a couple $100s in tickets. Well, if you don't have the money to pay that, you get put on a payment plan, which means you end up paying more over the long run. And you fall into this kind of black hole. I think somebody described it as when you go out there and when you get just that one thing to happen to you, get pulled over, get that one ticket, that one fine, it can really mess up your life for quite a while.
Yeah, and it's worth noting. I don't think this was in the story. It's worth noting that it's illegal in Alabama for local police in towns under 19,000 to give speeding tickets on the interstate. So towns like Brookside, on their interstate, they will, if your tag light's too bright or your tag light's too dim or you're following too closely or you're driving in the left-hand lane, which police argue the way they charge it hasn't even been a crime. They continue to pile those things on. Same thing with, like small amounts of marijuana. If somebody's charged with a small amount of marijuana, that charge, the marijuana as a charge, and then the baggie as a paraphernalia, and then the rolling paper as a paraphernalia, and a tray that might have held marijuana as paraphernalia. And, this particular guy I'm talking about ended up with that. Not enough marijuana to go to state court. It's not a felony. It's a misdemeanor amount of marijuana, but he's still owing a $12,000 fine. And so, that's the thing. When you talk about a $200 fine, it's really, really rare to see something that low because, number one, very few of the people that go into that court are actually charged with only one count because they find ways to stack more on them. And the fees themselves become outrageous. And so time after time, you find people who, did what, rolled a stop sign, went a few miles over the speed limit, let their car tag lapse, paying, hundreds, sometimes more than $1,000 in fines to the courts. And it, there's a lot of Twitter talk about, defund the police and all that. But my favorite was when, this was an example, as one guy said, of the police defunding the people.
Those are good points that you make there, John. I'm going to come back to Brookside, but Ashley, I want to talk to you about a story that you've published this morning, and this is about Baldwin County and ankle monitors. Now, you really go in depth in this story here, but I want to give you a chance to kind of tell us what this story is about. People might not have had as much time to read yours as they did John's yesterday, but something that was wild that you mentioned in your story is that people in Baldwin County are getting placed on ankle monitors for very low-level, non-violent offenses right after they're charged, not after they're convicted, not even after they have been indicted, but after they have been charged. Some of these cases don't even make it past a grand jury, yet they are paying for that ankle monitor and losing their freedom for quite a while.
Correct. And I mean, to be fair, not everyone who is on an ankle monitor in Baldwin County was charged with a low-level offense. We in fact included one woman in our reporting who she was charged with, a serious crime, a crime of violence, in fact. Of course, she was arguing that she had acted in self-defense, and a grand jury later tossed out the case. She did not end up being convicted of anything. But as you said, yeah, we are finding that a lot of the people there, they are charged with lower level offenses. Drug possession was a really common one. And what we heard from a judge there in Baldwin County who frequently does require people to wear ankle monitors is that he often imposes this if someone has, say, been arrested for drugs and, used again, got caught using, and that's when he, typically or often chooses to impose the ankle monitor. Of course, ankle monitors are not perfect. They are not something that can stop somebody from using drugs or, for that matter, committing other crimes. But the way the judge described it to us was that he felt that he needed to, I believe the phrase he used was rein that in. If someone who has already been charged with something is yet again accused of another offense, like drug possession, for example.
One thing that I think is really important to point out about your story and about ankle monitors in general is technology is not perfect. I think we have all learned that. I know the three of us are obviously still working from home. I think a lot of people are as well, but we've been working from home since 2020. There are plenty of days where the technology just fails. Whether it's here, people have seen live where people just drop off from interviews, whether it's on one of our daily meetings that we have at work where people can't figure out how to unmute or somebody falls off, there's just a technology issue. ankle monitors are not immune from those same technology issues. So, Ashley, tell us, if somebody is on an ankle monitor and they are following their rules, but there's maybe a misfire and the ankle monitor says they went somewhere they didn't, or they were out too long. What happens then? Are people getting charged with additional crimes because of a failure of technology?
That's certainly something that can happen. In the case of, one woman that we actually wrote about in this series, she's not actually in Baldwin County. She's in Jackson County in North Alabama. That was something that she, says she experienced was, a malfunction of the ankle monitor. It was blinking green, the little light on the ankle monitor that signifies or is supposed to that it's charged, sending your location back to the office where they're monitoring. It wasn't working according to the office that was monitoring her at the time. And she ended up, being in jail for over a month. And, then she eventually got out and went home. But, she maintained that the ankle monitor, was blinking. I remember when she was actually in jail during that, more than a month period, I interviewed her and she showed me on the video call that the ankle monitor was still on her ankle when she was in jail. And in the court records, the office that monitored her had said that maybe it was water damaged, but it was unclear if she knew that. And she maintained that she didn't damage the monitor. She had been talking to her probation officer, following the rules, checking in. And then the next thing she knew, a deputy was there to arrest her because of a malfunction where it just wasn't working. So it's certainly possible. We've seen it happen at least once.
This series is called Banking on Crime, and that kind of alludes to the money that is being made from crime. Ashley, tell us about ankle monitors and how expensive they are and who's footing the bill on those.
So what we found is almost everywhere that we looked, we were hearing the number $10 a day. That's how much they do cost in Baldwin County. And for the woman in Jackson County, actually, she was paying $10 a day as well for the first 7 months of her monitoring. She got some really good news actually in December while we were working on this reporting. So we were able to include this in our story that the state actually was able to provide her a monitor that she does not have to pay for. So that was some kind of good news, if you will. But yeah, we're finding that the standard seems to be about $10 a day or $300 a month.
Which is a lot of money, especially if you are somebody who is getting into the criminal justice system. You are trying to afford bail, you're trying to afford attorneys if you need one, and things of that nature. Ashley, that is just, it adds up. It might sound like $10 a day, not bad, but it can add up.
Well, I mean, just in Brittany Smith's case, the Jackson County case, I mean, her only steady income is $520 a month in Social Security. She gets odd jobs, but she said, no employer wants to hire somebody, with an ankle monitor and a felony conviction. And so $520 a month, take out the $300 for the ankle monitor. That's already half. She also has to pay for drug testing. She actually has to pay $26,000 she still owes the court. That's to cover restitution that she was ordered to pay as part of her case. It's also to cover the cost of her court-appointed attorneys because she pleaded guilty. Those, lawyers are not free. She has to repay the state. She also has to pay back fees for time that she spent in the jail. And so, I mean, this is not just a one fine. There's a hookup fee for an ankle monitor, the bail that you mentioned, so yeah, I mean, for the people that I've interviewed, it goes far beyond the $10 a day.
John, we talk about all this money, and again, we know that Brookside's about 49% of their town's revenue is coming from fees, fines, forfeitures. Again, that number from 2020 was $610,000 just from those fines and forfeitures. So what do we know about Brookside and what they're doing with that money? And again, if they're putting it on an audit, it doesn't seem like they're thinking this is a bad thing. I think the police chief even told you he thought this was a positive story.
Right. Well, incidentally, the audit reports for years have pointed out that Brookside didn't have a budget and that desperately needed a budget. And so finding out, exactly how a lot of things were spent has been sort of difficult. They did come up with a budget after we started asking questions in late fall, but there's still a lot of questions associated with that. But I mean, they also, get grants. They get government products. I mean, they have a tank, for God's sakes. They have been hiring police officers quite frequently. They went from one full-time police officer in 2018 to, according to deposition, 9 full-time and a few part-time last year. And then they announced the hiring of 6 more this year. We're talking about in this tiny town of 1,253 people. It's quite a force. And so what it appears to be from the current budget is that it's going right back into the police department. Sort of an empire building is what's happening.
There's been a lot of comparison, I think, from readers and from even our audience right now of saying that this sounds like Harpersville. If you are familiar with Alabama, if you're familiar with the past couple of years in Alabama, this was a similar situation in Harpersville where people said that they were getting all kinds of tickets that were then going back in to fund the city, and that it was, I believe one judge called it a debtor's prison. So, John, do you see this as comparable to Harpersville?
Yeah, and you'll see some of that in our work tomorrow. But Alabama has a long history of this. Fruithurst, I'm old enough to remember Fruithurst, which was the Harpersville of my youth, and near the Georgia line in Harpersville, in which Hub Harrington, the judge, said, this is a debtor's prison, because what they were doing was putting them on, getting people in. If you couldn't pay, you went on a private probation system that charged outrageous fees and sucked you in for a long time. And if you couldn't pay, they would use jail as the measure that would make you pay your debt. And so they were shut down. This is a little different because you can't use, private probation isn't as common as it used to be. And they're working it through themselves, but they built a jail. They hired dispatchers. They've really got this court system going in a way it's really alarming. And then they bring people in, they line up out the door. They direct traffic to get there. They bring the drug sniffing dogs out to sniff the cars while it's going on. It's problematic in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways reminiscent of Harpersville, and the fact that every time that the law makes an adjustment to sort of how we can deal with policing for profit or other issues for that matter, the system adapts. And so it's sort of like one of these things where you got to be constantly vigilant.
Ashley, do we know if Baldwin County is making money off of these ankle monitors?
So budget documents actually show that this program not only does not make money, but that the program operates on a pretty steep deficit. The most recent records that we saw were over $500,000 deficit for 2019, the fiscal year, and the projections for 2020 and 2021's fiscal year were similar. The people who operate this program told us that, that's not the purpose of the program, that it's not intended to make money, though it does charge people, these quite high fees of, the $300 per month, $10 a day. As well as they also have to pay like an installation fee, which I guess covers having the ankle monitor fastened on, of $75. And so as of right now, from what we've seen in these budget records, it seems that in fact the county is pouring additional money into this program.
Can I say one thing about the ankle monitors? I just find it astounding, Ashley, that a person would be charged with a crime that would not result in jail, that they would pay their bond to be out on bond, which is supposedly the way to ensure that you come back to court.
Right.
The purpose of bond, and then put on an ankle monitor at $10 a day, which is the same thing, right? So it's like you're paying bond and the ankle monitor for the same purpose. And then if you get on an ankle monitor and it malfunctions or you go to the wrong place, you go to jail.
Right.
On a crime you would not have gone to jail for if you had just pleaded guilty.
Right. And that's one of the things I think that was really kind of hard to wrap your mind around in the reporting process here too. You talked about, the ankle monitor, right, is kind of like another bond. Basically, it's a condition of bond. The sheriff's office did say that, they don't have any numbers on this. They say, it's really hard to, determine exactly how much, but, they say they believe they have saved some money from having people on ankle monitors instead of in jail. But, I also spoke to Kate Weisberg, who is sort of an expert on this nationally. She's a professor at George Washington University Law School. And one of the things that she talked about was that often ankle monitors do not keep people out of jail because there are so many rules where you can be, when, what time, whether you can stop at the store on your way home, can you pick up your kids, all these things that we just have to do in life, things that come up and often are not planned. And if you do those things, even though they're not new crimes, they can land you back in jail. And so that was certainly something that, Kate talked about a lot. And that, we found from people we interviewed that they always had the threat of going back to jail for some sort of non-criminal rules violation when they were being told the ankle monitor will keep you out of jail. And so I think that's a really important point that you bring up, John. And Ivana, if you don't mind, I'd like to throw a quick question to John, if that's okay.
Making my job easy.
Hey, I think the thing that was honestly one of the most stunning things about the reporting that you did on Brookside, and I think I told you this even back when we were editing, was, the other law enforcement, the other people in the justice system who were willing to speak with you and give you their perspective and their thoughts on Brookside and the practices there. So I just kind of wonder what that was like for you. What did you think when you had, the sheriff in Jefferson County, the district attorney? What did you think when you heard from them and got their perspectives? And maybe you could tell people what they said.
Well, I think that was very telling. I mean, both of them indicated they'd had lots of complaints about Brookside and felt like it diminished law enforcement in general and made it very difficult for officers out there who are trying to do a legitimate job. And honestly, I've been just deluged with people, with law enforcement officers in the wake of the stories that say, this is not what we do. And somebody should stop that. And that, that's been really one of the most rewarding things about it. And because also, frankly, in this day and age, you can write anything and it will be instantly politicized. And knock on wood, to this point, for the most part, it hasn't been in this case because people on both sides of the aisle recognize that there's no way to take somebody's rights more effectively than to do it in the name of the law. And so it's been really good to see law enforcement officers stand up about that. And we'll have some more on that tomorrow too. But it's also been good to see that this is something that everybody can agree is not the way that law enforcement was meant to be.
What's next? What's next for both of these? John, can the DOJ do anything? Is that what we have to wait on? Can the state do anything? And what are you planning to do next?
Well, I mean, it's complicated. I hear that both of those agencies are aware and may or may not be looking, how hard it is to know if there's really an investigation going on. There are parts of it that are just clearly not illegal. I mean, I think that, in a lot of states, it is illegal for a city to have more than 20%, or in some states, it's illegal to have more than 20% of your income come from fines and forfeitures. We're not one of them. And there are people who are talking about introducing some bills that might change some of those things. The bad news is it's difficult to find a really good solution, particularly in a place where people don't really want to pay taxes to support their government. When you don't when you don't support your government with taxes, as we've seen from 100 different forms of corruption in Jefferson County, for instance, they find other ways to do that. But when they use the police to do that, it's a dangerous thing.
Ashley, what is next for your reporting and for the situation going on with ankle monitors in Baldwin County?
Well, I mean, I think, one of the things that was really telling to me when I was working on this story, I interviewed, as I mentioned earlier, one of the judges who frequently, does order ankle monitors. And he was very, very willing to acknowledge and the cost and just the financial burden that it imposes on people. At this point, I don't know if there are any plans for any sort of changes there. That's certainly something that we're going to be, keeping an eye on and sort of looking into. One thing that I do want to pursue further, because it kind of happened late in our reporting process, is looking at when Brittany Smith got a new monitor that was free, how did that happen? And is that something that could work for other people in other parts of the state? If this is something, that we're going to have as part of the system, what are the ways that some places make it more affordable, and don't put that financial burden on people? So, yeah, I mean, we're just, we're at this point, the story's still kind of fresh, if you will. And so we're just kind of waiting to see, what comes next.
John, Ashley, incredible work, both of you. Thank you for explaining it a little bit and breaking it down for us. Again, we have now we have 4 stories out in this Banking on Crime series. There will be some follow-up tomorrow as well, and then we will see where this goes from there. So both of you, thank you. I know that you have both said that people can email you if they have experience or if they have stories to tell about either one of these topics. We'll make sure that these email addresses are in the comments here so people have easy access to that as well. So again, thank you both. Everybody watching, thank you so much, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.